Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my MSI play-in Day 2 overview and analysis of both the series that we got today. Another really fun day of games. You know, obviously Day 1, a little bit up and down, some really fun games, some really close games, and then some blowouts, definitely a little bit back and forth. This one definitely had more of a consistent theme over the course of the day, but we'll get into that when we get into the games. But, of course, let me know down below what you guys thought of all the games that happened today, both of the series. Obviously we're going to talk about both and all the games that went through them, but I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions on what you expected to happen and whether or not it actually lived up to your expectations down in the comment section below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Not a lot of posturing to do. Of course, if you do want to know about some of my thoughts on the teams that are going to be playing today, I did release a full MSI primer video where I ranked every single team, every single player, and previewed every single matchup in play-ins. You can check that out up in the iCard right now. There's going to be a lot of useful information for the teams that are covered today. Of course, I'll still give a small preview for each series just to kind of go over where I think the advantages and disadvantages for each team are. But if you want a more detailed breakdown of every single team here at MSI, that video is definitely the one you're going to want to check out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into our first series of the day. And this is the series that I think most people were looking at as maybe the least interesting series in round 1 of play-ins, because a lot of people think it's going to be a massive blowout, and I have to agree on that one. It's definitely what I'm expecting. We had a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LPL in Bilibili Gaming and the number 1 seed from the LLA in Movistar R7. Definitely a little bit of an uphill battle for R7 in this one. Bilibili definitely going to be favored by basically everybody. This is one of the best teams in the world. They just made finals in one of the most difficult regions in the world in the LPL, and obviously not super fair that they have to play in play-ins here. China, one of those regions that's just a little bit better than a lot of the other teams that they're going to be going against, and I think, me and a lot of other people expect this Movistar R7 team to actually be probably the worst team at the tournament, and so arguably the best team in play-ins versus arguably the worst team in play-ins. Certainly BLG is going to be a favorite here, but I have said there are some positives to R7 that I don't think they've been getting as much credit for in the build to this. I really liked Mirayu's tape in the mid lane. I really liked how he played out most of the playoffs in the LLA, especially in the finals. I thought he was a really interesting player, even if I don't think there was a ridiculous amount of talent surrounding him on the rest of the team. You've got a player like Audi who's been to international events plenty of times before, been to Worlds, been to MSI, etc., etc., and so it's not like this team is a complete pushover. I think that they're probably better than the Isurus team that we got at Worlds last year, but BLG is certainly a tough challenge to have to face in your first international event as an organization, but definitely going to be a little bit intriguing. If BLG gets early leads, I just don't think it's going to be possible for R7 to win these games. So they're really going to have to try and make sure that they get a jump on them early. But are they going to be able to do that in game number 1? Or is BLG just going to show that, R7 are a little bit of a pushover compared to them, and they're going to be looking more towards the next round? Well, the winner of game number 1 was Bilibili Gaming. BLG is able to take that first game, and this shocks absolutely no one. They were absolutely the team that should be able to take the first game here, and quite frankly, should be able to take every game in this series, and they definitely asserted their dominance in this game number 1. This was not a particularly close game. We had some close ones yesterday, like I said, but definitely not starting it off, I would say, with a close one here. BLG just being the better team basically across the board, making a lot of aggressive plays, executing on them flawlessly, and then even in positions where they probably should have lost, just outplaying their opponents to the point where it just didn't really matter. R7 had absolutely zero chance across this entire game. But what ended up happening? How did we end up getting here? Well, we started off the game with a couple of really impactful dives in the bot lane by BLG. Not really like the most explosive, like pre-5-6 minutes into the game, but by the time we get 8 minutes, BLG's bot lane had already established a relatively big lead on their own in the isolated 2v2, which was really big for them. And then BLG drafts this Nautilus mid that we've seen G2 pull out already at this tournament. There were some rumors, Doenb came out and said that LEC and LCS teams were absolutely destroying teams like BLG in scrims before this tournament, and with BLG pulling out the Nautilus mid, that's definitely something that I think you could consider as a realistic possibility, but they know they want to try and get out on the map early. You got June on the Lee Sin. a really aggressive early game jungler. You've got Yagao here on the Nautilus who wants to be able to roam and try to create plays for the rest of the team, and so they dive bot not once but twice early on in the game, and it gets Lucian and Nami so far ahead, and it puts this Xayah Rakan so far behind. And you look at the rest of this R7 comp, you're looking at the Xayah Rakan as something that really needs to stabilize and be a big threat because, you know, Gragas is going to do damage, but it's not going to be like carry level damage. Wukong's certainly not a carry. Olaf can carry, but he has to get ahead. You have to give him resources, and he has to be able to hit that late game from a relatively strong point. And none of that had really happened by 10 minutes into this game. After the double dives, it felt pretty much over on the side of R7. There really wasn't a lot that I felt like that team could do from that point. And you know what? That did kind of carry over. The mid game was definitely more of the same with BLG. A couple of outplays, I would say. Bin solo killing Bong in the top lane. Definitely not what you want to see with Cassante into Olaf. That basically ruins Olaf's game, you know, in the moment, right then and there. There's not much you can do. Elk absolutely obliterating Lions in the mid lane. This Lucian was so strong and dealing so much damage, you really could not step up and even hope to try to contest him. And then the big play, the 2v2 in the bot lane, where, quite frankly, R7 should have won it. They went into the position with it basically being a 2v1.5, right? I believe it was Yagao and Bin down there in the bot lane. Bin gets chunked way below half to even start the fight against them, and somehow, someway, BLG is able to turn it around. Just a complete outplay there from two full tanks going into some damage threats. And from that point onwards, it's like, how do you win? Like, you're being outplayed, you're being outscaled, you're quite frankly just being out macroed. Like, there really isn't any positives that can give to R7 from this point onwards. BLG decides to force Baron because they know that they can. They absolutely obliterate R7. They get the Baron, and they just brute force end the game. There's really not a lot to talk about in terms of analysis. They were the better team, and they absolutely showed it in this one. My player of the game is going to go to Elk in the bot lane because, again, they put a lot of resources into that Lucian, but he absolutely paid them out. I'm a huge fan of Elk. That's not a secret on this channel at all. I've been hyping him up for what is basically 3 years in a row now, and it's really good to see him on a good team. He had a phenomenal playoff run. He's arguably going into this tournament as the hottest AD carry, maybe outside of like Pays or Ruler, right? Like, those are the AD carries that you're going to be looking at just being so scorching hot and genuinely making a case to be, you know, one of the best AD carries in the world right now. Elk is absolutely in that conversation, and he proved that he deserves to be in this game. On also played well. I really like his Nami. Typically, this is not a pick that he has succeeded super highly on. He's definitely more of a hook, engage-oriented kind of support, but Lucian Nami, if you're able to pilot at a really high level, is still going to be strong if you're, like, the better bot lane, which obviously Elk and On were this game. It's really cool to see them bring out the Nautilus mid. You gotta love the innovation. It's definitely something that, you know, G2 has had a lot of success at because they like to enable the rest of their map. This is actually a style that I think fits BLG relatively well. Yagao, not afraid to give up resources in the mid lane, not afraid to be a little bit more passive in terms of quote-unquote carry potential to be able to help the rest of the team, and I think that's what a pick like Nautilus does at a super high level, and so I actually really like this adaptation from BLG, even if it maybe is a little bit funny in hindsight, just how they ended up getting there. Bin had another really good game. He was in contention for player of the game, loved him on the Cassante, and then Jun was good enough on the Lee Sin. He certainly didn't make any bad plays, just, you know, I think everybody else was a little bit more standout in terms of what they offered the team. I just think BLG dominated. There are no negative notes I could give this team. All 5 players played their role fine, and, you know, if they do this again, it's going to be an absolute cakewalk towards the main stage of MSI. And then for R7 on the other side, you're just outmatched here. Like, there really is nothing else to say. I feel really bad for this team that this is the international experience that they're going to get. Hopefully these players can learn and grow from games like this because it's just really not super fair to place these two teams against each other. As much as I like Mireyu, there's just not a lot that he can do on Gragas, especially when Yagao is moving all over the map and just creating plays. He doesn't even really get a chance to 1v1 lane in the mid lane. And then Seo and Lions were just destroyed in this bot lane. Seo's going to get my dud of the game, but you could give it to Lions as well. Both of them were very bad. It's not even their fault entirely, right? Like, they just lost lane early, which can happen against Lucian Nami. Like, it's totally possible, especially when, quite frankly, you're just the worst players. But then just getting perma-dove over and over and over and getting picked on by the Lucian, having to match him on the map everywhere you go. It was just a recipe for disaster. This Xayah never even got close to coming, you know, online, and the Rakan was just useless this entire game. And so the bot lane definitely becoming a little bit of a problem, but Bong getting solo killed up in the top lane, Audi not having any jungle pressure, Mireyu essentially accomplishing nothing throughout the entirety of this game. Like, there's just no positives I can give R7. They're not in the same league as BLG, and that was pretty clearly proven over the course of this game. But you gotta hope that they're at least going to be able to put up a fight. I'm not saying that they need to take a game, but I'm saying that they at least need to look like they deserve to be here at this tournament, and, you know, against BLG, it's a pretty tall ask. But are they going to be able to do that in game number 2? Well, we'll find out right now, because the winner of game number 2 was BLG. Bilibili Gaming takes game number 2. They're able to close this out in a pretty clean 2-0 sweep. 23 minutes, not a lot of problems here for the LPL's second seed in play-ins. And, you know, again, I can't say that I'm surprised. It's BLG that came into this series expecting to kind of dominate it and be the better team and be able to come out on top, and they executed. They did exactly what everybody kind of wanted to see them do at this stage, and you gotta give them credit for that. I mean, they basically got everything that they wanted in draft. I mean, it's really funny that you have to ban out the Nautilus after that game 1, but Lucian, I totally understand. Annie, you know, again, I get it. Yagao's played a really good Annie, even if I don't think it's necessarily the biggest threat that this comp could bring out at the moment. Like, I understand the bans, but that means you're leaving up June's Nidalee, and that's just a disaster, right? The champion got buffed. Obviously, some item changes could have made her a little bit more relevant, but, you know, it's his best champion. He was basically a one-trick for a long time before he went pro. And so he can still bring it out at a super high level. Bin is a really good Renekton. You've got that solo synergy. You're able to play something like a Jace for an AD mid and just kind of take over. And then, you know, Elk and On. We'll get to them. Elk and On are pretty darn good at the game of League of Legends. But let's go ahead and talk about what happened in this game just in general. You know, 23-minute win. You might look at this as a game that was more stompy than game number 1, but I would disagree. I think early game was a lot more favorable for R7 than game 1's was. I actually think they were relatively relevant, and a lot of that is the Elise pick coming out of the jungle. Really good pathing by Audi to actually get some early advantages. Actually, First Blood does go over to R7. June feels like he can try to fight for that level 1, or not level 1, for that 1v1 early on in the game, but R7 does a really good job of controlling that macro, being able to punish it, and June actually dies for First Blood, getting that onto the Elise, and then he immediately moves topside to try to make a play onto the Renekton, and it absolutely works out. You're sitting at a 2-0 early lead for R7, and it's like, oh, okay, like, they're actually using this Elise, they're being able to create early advantages, which is not good for Renekton, and it's not good for Nidalee either, to see the Elise on the other side actually being able to kind of set the tempo and be able to generate those leads, but BLG still does a really good job of being able to counterplay. June realizes that top lane, maybe not necessarily what he should play for, even though the Renekton is up there, so he starts going bot lane knowing that the player advantage there is absolutely massive, and they continue to make bot lane an absolute nightmare for R7. They get Elk super far ahead, and the gold, you know, it doesn't even out because BLG definitely is super far ahead at this point, but, you know, for R7 at the very least, they're more relevant in the early game, even if BLG is definitely still ahead. But the problem with how things ended up going is that Elk just got way too strong. He ends up destroying Seo bot, not once, but twice. Once in a 1v1 or a 1v2 basically under tower, and then the other time in just an isolated 2v2 where they just don't respect Elk's damage. Seo's like, I have the perfect guns. You know, it's red-white. Let's go ahead and fight. And then Elk's like, I don't care what guns you have. I'm just going to beat you anyways. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that R7's bot lane really isn't holding up. But Elk is ridiculously strong on the Jinx by this point in the game, and there's really not a lot that R7 can do. It's really kind of the example of the mid-game. BLG end up controlling that the entirety of that mid-game, controlling dragons, not really prioritizing them super highly, but going for towers, you know, controlling the map, just having general pressure basically everywhere and not giving it up anywhere. This is what really good teams, like the best teams in the world, are able to do. They're able to not only generate that pressure, but make sure that the enemy team has no ways of being able to counter that pressure, which is good. Like, yes, Mireyu and Audi are making some plays. I actually like how both of them played in this game, but for the most part, BLG is still controlling it, and then Elk and June just become an unbeatable duo. You've got the Nidalee, if he's hitting spears, even if he's not, like him jumping in does a ridiculous amount of damage, and Elk does a ridiculous amount of damage. If both of those two are in a fight, you're just not going to be able to win it on the side of R7. That was essentially the case, and that was how they got into the late game. Now, eventually, Baron does come up. BLG just force it because they figure they win every fight and they 50-50 it, and they're like, whatever, man. It doesn't even matter if we lose Baron. We're going to win anyways. They do lose it. Audi actually does go ahead and steal the Baron. He had a really good game. We'll get into that later, but he ends up dying in that exchange. Bong gets caught out on the top side for absolutely no reason. And then BLG's just like, well, two are dead. I know they have Baron, but we can just end the game, and they hard force, and they are able to end it just in 23 minutes. And so another really solid game from BLG. Not that we were expecting anything different, but this was June and Elk all the way. Really good performances from both. I think you could give player of the game to either, but I'm going to give it to Elk. I think he was just a little bit more consistent in a lot of these fights, not necessarily as up and down in the early game. I think June had a really good adaptation to leave top lane alone, and that was a really good macro decision, but, you know, Elk getting ahead just made the game impossible to win for the side of R7. Their Aphelios was super far behind. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but Elk was just phenomenal in this first series of play-ins, basically living up to every bit of hype that we could have possibly hoped for, but June getting on his signature champion in Italy also looked pretty phenomenal. On was good on the Lulu, enabling the Nidalee for the most part this game. Actually, they stuck together a lot as three, which you would expect from jungle ADC and support towards the back half of a game, especially with Renekton and Jace being the side laners. They can definitely, you know, create their own in side lanes. They don't necessarily need the kind of babysitting that something like a Jinx does in terms of mobility, but On was ulting that Nidalee a lot and creating this, like, unkillable tiger that just kind of pounces on you at any moment, and it really took a lot of heat off of Elk's back as well, and so those three created a big problem. Bin was the target of a lot of pressure on the side of R7, so his score doesn't look nearly as good, but, you know, getting that pressure was honestly a positive because it meant that it wasn't going bot lane, so hard to complain there, even if, you know, he did die a couple of times more than he probably needed to under tower. And then Yagao was fine. No, like, standout, unbelievable plays from Yagao, but this wasn't his game to dominate. This was June, Elk, and On's game to really be the stars. As for R7 on the other side, Seo's going to get another dud of the game. He was just so outclassed across this entire series, but especially in this game number 2, which really was kind of bad for him. The Aphelios into Jinx matchup, you have to be able to survive, and he was playing so aggro, taking fights when he had absolutely no reason to. That 2v2 in the bot lane where, you know, he has red-white and he's looking to fight. I mean, he's already down, like, so much gold in that matchup. I have no idea why he thought he would be able to take that in any circumstance, but he absolutely wasn't. I do think that there were some positives to take away for R7. I thought the jungle mid duo was actually pretty good this game. Audi made a lot of really heads-up plays in the early game on this Elise, actually was able to generate a nice lead in the jungle, even if it did go away relatively quickly after some nice plays from June, but Mireyu was also dealing a lot of damage. I thought his positioning on the A-Soul was pretty solid, and these two were definitely the standout members, but everybody else was just really negative. The bot lane was awful. Seo and Lions looked like arguably the worst players at the entire tournament, or at least that's what they looked like in this series, and then Bong was just nothing in the top lane, even with a lot of pressure and a lot of help from Audi in the early game. He essentially translated that into nothing in team fights. He was getting deleted instantly, his positioning was not very good, and he wasn't peeling anybody, so what really was the point of the Cassante pick? I'm not sure, but overall, not really all that surprising. Seeing BLG walk out of this series with a dominating 2-0 win, it's not going to shock people. Nobody's eliminated here, but BLG is going to be playing the winner of the series that we're going to cover after this. The winner of that moves on to the main stage, and, you know, if BLG plays like they did even remotely today, I mean, it's not even going to be close. This is going to be the easiest call to make with them getting out of play-ins. But moving on to our second series of the day here, and this one, it's probably going to be a little bit closer. We talked about that first series as a really big mismatch in terms of teams talent-wise, but I think a lot of people are looking at this matchup as a lot closer, arguably even in the same tier, which is where I did put these teams. We have a matchup between the number 2 seed from the LCS in Golden Guardians and the number 1 seed from the VCS in GAM Esports. Really intriguing matchup on paper. I think that there are certain advantages and disadvantages that both teams have against each other when you're looking at this specific matchup in the first place. I think that the side lanes are going to be incredibly important in terms of how this game ends up going. Both teams have really solid junglers and mid laners that, you know, while are good, are not going to completely change the game, although Gory could potentially do that for Golden Guardians, but I think GAM definitely has an advantage in the top lane, in my opinion. Kiaya is a very good player that they like to dump resources into, and I think that could be an area of strength for this team. And then I think the opposite. I think Golden Guardians definitely has an advantage in the bot lane. Style and Zen have certainly not been the strength of GAM over the course of the year, and Stixay and Huki have really found form coming back together in 2023, both having some of the best years that they've had in a very long time. And so I really think this matchup is interesting. In the predictions video, I went with Golden Guardians. As you guys know, I ranked them higher in my power rankings, and I said that they were going to be able to win this series. I do think that the bot lane diff is just a little bit too big in my mind, and I like the Gory and Takati matchup for Golden Guardians, even if I do think Kiaya and Levy are pretty strong on the top side of the map, but I don't think it's nearly enough for me to say, you know, definite win. Like, this is not the first series that we were talking about where BLG definitely should be winning. Either of these teams could come out on top, and I wouldn't be entirely surprised. So what ended up happening in this best of 3? Well, we got to kick it off with game number 1, and the winner of game number 1 was Golden Guardians, they are able to take the first game of the series. They're able to go up 1-0, which obviously in a best of 3 is a huge advantage. It forces GAM to have to win both of the final 2 in order to survive. And, you know, with the format that we're here at in play-ins at MSI, you know, the way that the tournament is structured, it is super advantageous to be able to get out of the first round with an extra win here, you know, to be able to get to that winners finals, if you will. And so a big win here for Golden Guardians to set that up. A lot of people were looking at North America super low when going into this event. I think, you know, I hate to be the guy that just talks about narratives and talks about, you know, whether they're fair or not fair, because I do think that, you know, a lot of times narratives do stem from good places, and I understand why North America is viewed as, you know, almost in the same tier as the VCS or the PCS or some of these, like, tier 1.5 regions, but, you know, historically, when you look at matchups like this, it very much makes sense to see Golden Guardians be able to come out and dominate it early on. We've seen North America not really struggle against wildcard regions basically ever. That's something they've actually been very good at historically, is beating wildcard regions, and that definitely carried over here. But what ended up happening in game number 1, how did Golden Guardians get their win? Well, it was actually a pretty good early game from GAM. They were the ones who started out with a lot of the aggressive points in this game, most notably a couple of dives that both went in favor of GAM, not all initiated by GAM. They do get first blood on a dive top lane going onto Licorice, which I think is a good call. You know, the Poppy's going to be relatively weak early if you can get on top of her, and then like we said, Kiaya should have a mechanical advantage into a player like Licorice, who I just don't think is quite as mechanically skilled as a player like Kiaya. So, you know, I like the idea of going for that, and then almost immediately after, Golden Guardians try to answer with the dive bot lane to try to equalize it, but it's misplayed, you know, quite significantly by Huki, and GAM is able to get in there and able to counter the dive, making it a 1-for-0 in favor of them, and that sets them up in a pretty decent spot in the early game. Unfortunately, there's really just not a lot of plays that they can do to actually capitalize on that. Golden Guardian stays active, they stay aggressive on the map. They nice punish on a mid gank by GAM, or by Golden Guardians in the mid lane. It was a gank by GAM that Golden Guardians ended up punishing, and then second Drake fight is really where things started to move in the favor of GG. That's where they really win it hard. They end up getting the 50-50 smite off. They're able to basically destroy everybody in that fight. I think it's a 2-for-0 or a 3-for-0, and Golden Guardians use that momentum to then just control the entire map for basically the entirety of the mid game. They use that aggression, they use that macro advantage to just kind of out macro GAM, which is a really good sign. I think NA, you know, has honestly gotten underrated in terms of what their macro is. You can talk about the mechanics. I don't think mechanics are the strength of the region, but I do think that the macro has been underrated over the course of the year so far, and I think these two teams are probably going to show that off a bit at this event. But Golden Guardians doing a great job just basically out macroing GAM over the course of the mid game, consistently getting objectives, consistently catching enemies out inside lanes when they know they don't have vision. Just really good stuff, things that you would expect top tier teams to be able to do. Golden Guardians was able to execute on, and then by the time we hit the late game, you've got Huhi on one of his more explosive champions, and it was just engage after engage after engage. That was perfect coming out from the set here in the support position. Yes, he was dying first in a lot of these fights, but the amount that he was able to set up with those engages really let the rest of the team absolutely destroy. If you're willing to die for a 4-for-1, like, yeah, I'm going to take that basically every day of the week, and Huki was doing it over and over and over again. They did one to get Soul, they did one to get Baron, and then they were able to close it out with a really nice mid-game fight and just kind of run it down to win. And so, good stuff overall from Golden Guardians. Huki is going to get my player of the game here in game number 1. He was the one creating basically every chance for Golden Guardians towards the back half of the game, even if he did misplay that early dive just a tad bit. Getting him on a champion like Set that he has played at a very high level over the past few years, even on 100 Thieves, it's just a good look overall for him, and I think he definitely showed that you can't not take him seriously. And then the two carry roles, I think, were also fantastic for the side of Golden Guardians. Gory on the Ahri and Stixxay on the Zeri. I thought both played very, very well. Stixxay was never in danger this entire game. His positioning was perfect. You know, you always like his aggression, but sometimes it can be a little bit too much, and he can get himself caught out. But in this game, he was playing basically perfectly on the edge of danger with that Zeri, and then Ahri as well. I think Gory gets underrated in general in terms of, you know, what to expect from him internationally. I think this was a really good Ahri game. The mid gap was very big, which we will get to in just a minute, but Gory definitely taking advantage of being the better mid laner in this game. Licorice was great on weak side River, not really making any mistakes and capitalizing on a lot of the things that Huhi and Gory were doing really right in this game, and that's really all you can ask for from Golden Guardians. Yes, the bot dive early on didn't go exactly their way, but that was probably the only play that stood out as, you know, a negative from Golden Guardians. Everything else really worked. And then for GAM on the other side, Definitely not how you wanted to start your tournament. You were probably pretty happy with the draw. Golden Guardians, probably one of the teams that you wanted to get most out of this section of, teams, I guess, in play-ins. And unfortunately for GAM, they just weren't able to capitalize here in this first game. A couple of their players just not playing up to expectations. I was worried about Style and Zin going into the series, but it was Kati in game number 1 that really was the problem. He's going to get my dud of the game on the Tristana in the mid lane. The mid gap really was pretty big in this series. Not only was he bad in lane, but he was bad out of lane as well, getting caught in side lanes, not dealing damage in team fights, using the rocket jump too early, and getting blown up because of it, getting punished for it. It's just not what you want to see. He's got to be better if they want any shot at this series, because Kiaya was dealing damage. Like, there was a way for Gwen to get back into this game. Levy, while, being completely squishy in the late game and getting blown up quickly, I think in a different circumstance could have been useful. And Style and Zin, for, as not good as they were, in my opinion, in the playoffs, I think definitely showed something this game, even if Style's positioning is still really bad. It was Kati that I think really made this game a lot less winnable for GAM, and I think if they can figure that out, give him something that's a little bit more safe in the mid lane, not the Tristana that's going to be relied upon a bit more to be aggressive, I think that's going to help out this team a lot. But for the most part, GAM's got a rebound. Again, it wouldn't be the worst thing of all time to drop into the lower bracket, but you probably don't want to get swept by Golden Guardians. That probably wasn't on your desire list going into this tournament. But for GG, it feels like they're proving once again that NA always gets underrated against wildcards. They may not be able to compete with China and Korea and on that same level, but this is a region that has historically been able to dominate wildcard regions, and that definitely continued in game 1. But will it continue in game number 2? Well, we're going to find out right now, because the winner of game number 2 was Golden Guardians. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to close out this series with a clean 2-0 sweep and conclude our first round with 4 series that all ended 2-0 in these best of 3. Certainly not, I think, what the MSI organizers were hoping for in terms of first round matchups, but none of these were really all that surprising. And honestly, it's just good to see Golden Guardians performing so well across these first couple of games. I know a lot of people were really doubtful. Gonna give a small plug to Molecule on Twitter. Love him. The best Twitter follow that you can have is Molecule. If you don't follow him, I don't know why I'm giving him a plug. He doesn't need it from me. I'm sure you watching this channel probably follow him on Twitter, but the best follow on Twitter. Tweeted out all those infographics for MSI and for every team, and he did his power rankings as well. He had Golden Guardians at 12, and I just look at something like that, and I look at, all the public opinions from everybody else, and I'm like, man, I don't get it, man. This team does a lot of things right. They're not perfect. They don't do everything correctly. They're still a team that probably isn't going to be able to compete with, G2 and Mad Lions and Cloud9, but, can they beat GAM, relatively easily? Yes, absolutely, and you know what? I think they absolutely proved that today. Really, really good stuff. This is arguably a top 8 team at the tournament. That's where I put them, I believe, is number 8, and so I really like the performance they showed today, and I think they're definitely making me look pretty smart here, at least on day number 1. But how did we end up getting to a 2-0 sweep here for Golden Guardians? Well, they stayed aggressive in the early game, and this is what I've always liked about Golden Guardians, is they're not afraid to try and make plays. Specifically, Huhi and River, they both really try to push the tempo of the game, progress the game as quickly as possible. Huhi, in particular, definitely is not going to shy away from an aggressive attempt early in the game. He's such a phenomenal team fighter, but it's the early aggression that I think separates him from a lot of the other supports that come out, especially in North America, and I think that was definitely on display here. They're able to get first blood in GAM's jungle. They basically full invade. They're able to pick off Zim, as Style just has to run away, and that's how you know the full map control is in favor of Golden Guardians, even very early on into this game. They're able to do that. Really good setups just in general for objectives early game for Golden Guardians. A lot of 1v1 trades in bot river before, after first dragon and then right before second dragon, but for the most part, Golden Guardians is still coming out on top in a lot of these exchanges and a lot of these trades, and I think they do a good job. But where the game really gets broken open, in my opinion, is going to be, not in my opinion, where it gets broken open is going to be the top river fight that ends up happening. It looks pretty good for GAM at the beginning. It's a nice engage, good ultimate from Braum, and a nice shockwave from Orianna to actually be able to pick off what I believe was Gory early. It might have been River. It was one of the two, but give this Tristana a little bit extra time to be able to play, and she's going to make you pay. Stixxay had a pretty fantastic game here, and, the start of it was this quadra kill that he ended up getting in the top river fight. That's really where things started to just get completely out of control for GAM, where they really weren't able to come back into this game at all. Golden Guardians does a great job controlling the whole map. They're able to get picks. They're able to really set up for objectives very nicely. Not a single objective going the way of GAM over not only only this game, but over the entire series. It just goes to show you that Golden Guardians definitely prioritized trying to get that under control, and the tape definitely backs that up. It's not just a stat thing. And then we eventually get to the Baron fight. Golden Guardians are able to win that. They're able to secure Baron, and then they go to try to end the game. Gory does get picked off, which isn't ideal, but in the 4v5 in the enemy's base at the end of the game, Stixxay just absolutely pops off. The entire team fights really well. They end up winning the 4v5. Stixxay gets his pentakill at the end of the game, and Golden Guardians is able to take it 2-0. It's just as good as you could ask for. Again, I've been saying it for a little while. I don't want to get over-eager by saying this, but I do think people are underrating North America, and I don't mean that in the way of, like, I think North America could compete with LCK and LPL teams. I don't think that they can compete with LCK and LPL teams, but I do think that they have been significantly better than the wildcard regions for a little while now. And, you know, we'll talk about this a bit later. I think European teams are a little bit more shaky this year. I don't think the gap is that massive. I think NA is still your fourth in terms of, like, region, but like, they're definitely fourth. I've seen people say, like, oh, the VCS is better, the PCS is better, or at the very least on the same level. This series proves to me that it's just not the case. Golden Guardians was so much better than them in this series. It really wasn't close at all. Player of the game for me is going to go to Stixxay. How can it go to anybody else? He was so aggressive and so dominant on this Tristana. Obviously, Stixxay on Tristana brings back a lot of good memories for North America fans. You know, going all the way back to 2016 Spring Finals, where Rageblade Tristana completely took over the game, but it's good to see him continue to be aggressive. It's good to see that Tristana be a really, you know, positive flex, I would say, for this team. I think Stixxay was phenomenal over the course of the series. So was Huhi on this Amumu, on this set. These are the kinds of picks I want to see Golden Guardians pulling out. I know they're not, you know, quote-unquote the most meta, but this is what this team does really well. They're able to create these crazy advantages in team fights by Huhi just playing out of his mind, playing ridiculously aggressive, you know, playing like a crazy person, going in and engaging basically all the time. I'm not saying he's like Hylissang, because I think they're very different play styles, but they kind of execute things in similar ways of just who he wants to go in, he wants to create panic, and he wants to try and give his life for the team. And, you know, a lot of times this game he didn't even have to give his life. The Amumu was massive, the set was massive in game number 1, this bot lane was dominant, and that's really where I thought that Golden Guardians was gonna be able to get their advantage this series, and it definitely played out that way. But that's not to say the rest of the map was bad. Licorice had a really good game on the Renekton, was definitely the better top laner across this series, which is not what I was expecting. And then River, his first games of Viego across the year so far, and both of them were pretty solid. Gory, you know, had some moments where he was just absolutely deleting people. I think he just instantly deleted style in the mid lane behind tier 2 at a point in this game, which was really funny, but also got caught out a little bit. I still think Gory's a really good player that is getting slept on internationally, but Golden Guardians has proven their worth. At this point, we know that this team is good. Like, they're not maybe one of the best teams in the tournament or anything like that, and I'm not trying to oversell them by saying that they're, like, gonna dominate everybody that they go up against, but you have to take this team seriously. Like, this is not a team that you can just completely overlook. If you're Jitsu, if you're Mad Lions, you know, like, you can't completely just forget about Golden Guardians. They've proven today that a lot of the momentum that they were able to generate, a lot of the shock value that they were able to get by beating some teams that people thought were going to be there over them, you know, it's real. This isn't a team that doesn't deserve to be here. They absolutely deserve to be here, even if they weren't expected to be here. And then for GAM, on the other side, just about as miserable of a start to this tournament as you could ask for as good as Golden Guardians were. I think you could definitely make a case that GAM very much underperformed in this first series, and that was a big reason why it was so easy for Golden Guardians. This bot lane was not very good. Zin's gonna get my dud of the game here, but I think you could realistically give this to a few people. Katsi on the Orianna wasn't very good. He hit one good shockwave, but outside of that, was just way too aggro, was stepping up when he had absolutely no right to, was getting caught out in situations where he really shouldn't have been caught out. It was just not great macro coming out from the mid laner, and this just goes to show some, you know, maybe over-aggressive tendencies that he was able to get away with in the VCS. Kiaya had a much worse series than I was expecting. I like Kiaya a lot as a player. I thought he was really good when I was watching VCS tape. That didn't exactly translate to this series for me, but obviously he's still got time to turn it around. Levy, Style, nobody performed well on the side of GAM. Their macro in particular was terrible. Their objective control was non-existent. Just very much things that they need to work on. They're not going to be able to beat a lot of teams at this tournament if they're not able to get over some of those humps. Hopefully, you know, they're going to be able to get things together before they end up, you know, going up against R7 in that lower bracket, but you know, you don't want to say that they should be on the same level as R7, but like this was not a good showing, and that's a series that could potentially be an upset alert if GAM continues to play the way that they did in this one. But for Golden Guardians, congratulations. They've now got an impossible task of having to go up against BLG in a best of 3 and plans to try to get out here, but even if they aren't able to win that series, who's to say that Golden Guardians isn't the best team not named BLG left in play-ins, or maybe NG2 probably, right? Like who's to say that they're not the best team, you know, left out of non-BLG G2 teams left in the play-ins, and a very realistic team to get out in third place. I think that is definitely the case, even if a lot of people going into this event didn't exactly give them the credit for that. Alright, but that is going to do it for my MSI Play-ins Day 2 overview and analysis. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Of course, now we know all 4 of the teams that are going to get a shot to play to get out of this group, really, in just 2 series. 2 of those will be making it out. The other 2 are going to have to go right back in and try to get that last chance qualifier, a massive series, or set of series, I should say, coming up tomorrow, but we'll cover that when we get to that. Of course, these are the series I predicted, so if you want to know my thoughts, again, you can check out that video that's up in the iCard where I go over these series. I predicted both of these outcomes, and so definitely go check that out if you're interested, but if you enjoyed this video, let me know down in the comment section below. Who do you think's going to win? BLG Golden Guardians, G2 PSG? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts, of course, down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. Not only does it show me that you guys are enjoying the content that I'm putting out, but it also helps get this video out to more people. And then, of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be posting about every single MSI day here on the channel, so if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy the rest of the MSI coverage as well. We're going to be doing the entire play-in stage, the entire main stage, everything, and so if you're interested, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can get notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.